if you're brand new to watercolour or just want to rebuild your confidence, this video is for you. I'm showing you 6 really easy, simple watercolour techniques that will help you understand how watercolour actually behaves. It's not complicated, there's no big projects or pressure. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the wet on wet technique. This is where you basically put some water down. This is where you got to clean your brush. Let me do that again, ignore that. This is where you put your water down. So the paper is wet. And then you pick up a colour and you put some paint down. So the paper is wet, the brush is wet, and you've also got wet paint. Okay, wet on wet technique, easy. However, there is also a colour wet on wet technique. And I say this because I don't think people realise it. I don't think I realised it when I was a beginner. So this is where your paper is wet in a second. We're going to wet it with some colour. Really gorgeous yellow colour. Let's just make a petal, for example. So the paper is wet, and there's also a colour on there as well. And then I'm also going to put another colour. That is also the wet on wet technique, and I didn't realise that when I first started. I thought the wet on wet technique was you just put water down, clear water down, and you don't put a colour down. So I'm just saying that just in case you weren't aware, that's also the wet on wet technique. So also another one we have is a blending technique. There's 2 ways to blend. First of all, you could put, let's do the petal again, and then put your colour down halfway, and then you can also get the second colour and put that down halfway as well, and that will just blend on the paper. That's one way of blending. Again, the other way of blending is to put the colour down without wetting the paper. Put a colour down first and then put down another colour next to it, and again that will still just blend on the paper. Really useful techniques, really easy and really simple to use, and I'd say I use those 3 all the time. We have also got the lifting technique. I'll be honest, I don't really use the lifting technique very much, to be completely honest, but let me explain what that is. Let's put some really decent colour down. There we go. So the lifting technique is quite simply dry your brush, clean your brush first, dry it off a little bit, and then when the paper is wet with your paint, then you can use your brush to basically lift the paint off. I don't really use that very often, but I know a lot of people do. It's quite handy for highlights, and if you want to move the pigment around like that and just create a completely different effect. I don't use it very often because I'm worried about damaging the paper. This paper is really cheap, so I'm not bothered, but really expensive paper, I just don't like doing it. I tend to, if I am gonna use it or need the white, I will leave a bit of the white clear rather than use the lifting technique, but you get a much harsher white of the paper, whereas that is much softer. So it just depends what kind of a look you're going for. Entirely up to you. So the next one that I wanted to show you is the glazing technique. Now for the glazing technique, I haven't written it down. The glazing technique is where you put a colour down. We're going to have to wait for it to dry, so I will come back to it, but basically you go over it with another colour, a very light and a very thin layer of colour. Now you might be asking, it sounds very similar to layering, but that's not the same as layering. Glazing is slightly different, which takes me on to layering. So we will come back to that, which takes me on to layering, which I will also pop down some white, and I'm going to wait for both of them to dry and come back to those in a second when they have dried. Okay, so I'm back after a few moments. Glazing versus layering. So glazing is where you use a very, very diluted, I'm getting water everywhere, sorry, is where you use a very, very diluted bit of water. And so I've got a colour there, and I have put quite a bit of water in there, so it's not as bright, it's not as vivid. And then the glazing technique is we go over it ever so carefully to glaze the colour, so you can still see the colour underneath. You haven't completely covered it, it's dry, so it's not going to mix with the paint underneath. So that is glazing. The layering technique is when you are using more pigment, not as much water, and you are going to go on top of that paint that you have put down with the intention of not necessarily covering it up completely, but with the intention of adding another layer so that you don't really see the other layer below. I hope that makes sense, but that is, anyway, it's my understanding of layering. And I just thought it'd be good to just explain a few of these little techniques with you. So just for the last bit, let me just paint a nice little flower for you, just using some of those techniques just so you can see. So I'm using the colour wet on wet technique. Look at that, that's so lovely. This is rubbish paper as well. This is 250 grams of paper, and I would recommend ideally you use 300 GSM, but that's okay. Use the wet on wet technique. Drop some colour in. Just to give you an idea. And that's how I use mostly these 3 techniques. Hope that's helped you anyway. I hope that's given you a little bit of an insight of what I do and how you can use these techniques in your everyday works. I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.